Welcome back to Boiler Wild. My name is Eric Johnson. On this podcast, talk about boiler industry topics as well as personal development. They go hand in hand. You should want to strive to be a better person in your career and at home, whether you are single and live alone or you live with other people, have a family, and even just be a part of your community. I'm a firm believer that a small community of people of support is much better than being a lone isolationist and only focusing on your career or only focusing on your family. Your career and your home life go hand in hand, so we should want to strive to be better in both. And the name of this podcast, Boiler Wild. Wild is an acronym. It stands for work hard, invest in yourself, lead others, and develop yourself into a person of excellence. This is the second time recording this episode of this podcast. Hopefully, this one goes better. The first episode got all messed up and just was not audible. And so I took a break, yelled at the wall, and said, well, second time it should be better and it should work. This is what happens when you get a different recording set up and you don't know 100% of what you're doing. And that's the whole story with this podcasting is not knowing what I'm doing and figuring it out as I go. And yeah, we are figuring it out. We are doing it. It is November 11th at the recording of this podcast, 2025. It's cold. The Midwest got snow. I'm not sure about the Northeast. In Florida, it was 35 last night. So everybody is freezing, bundling up. I had to put on a hoodie. I am in Florida, if you did not know that. So lived in Ohio most of my life, but now live in Florida, and 35 in Florida, you might as well just call it negative 40 because people are not used to the cold and are not super prepared for the cold, but it's actually refreshing to say. I would say for me, it's refreshing for me, but there are a lot of people who hate it. And the only reason they live in Florida is because it's warm. But anyways, we are right in the start of boiler season. It is getting cold. It is cold, but getting cold consistently. And hopefully the northern states get a decent amount of snow. I know snow has been on and off the past 5 to 10 winters on how much each state actually gets, but snow is always fun, especially for Christmas time. The holidays are coming up, and yeah, everything gets busy, everything gets weird. Some people get super busy around the holidays. Some people slow down a little bit. A lot of shutdowns are between the Christmas and New Year's, but it's just a different kind of schedule. And people, a lot of companies have holiday parties, Christmas parties, and yeah, everything is just a little bit different in the new year. But don't wait for January 1st to make a New Year's resolution. You can change your life today. Change your life now. But what I want to talk about, that was just the intro. Just trying to be more personable. Let me know if I should just jump right into what I want to talk about, or if giving a couple thoughts before what I want to talk about and trying to be human is preferred or a waste of time. If you just say, hey, Eric, give us the facts. We don't care about what your thoughts are and your opinions and the weather. We just want the facts. Came here for the facts. Stay on business. I'll take your feedback, and I do appreciate feedback from you all. So if you want to give feedback, you can DM me on LinkedIn or email me, eric.johnson@boylearn.com. I did get some feedback from Matthew. Matthew's enjoying the podcast and also had a episode request, which I will record soon and put out for that topic that he requested. But thank you, Matthew, for the positive feedback on the podcast. I will keep doing it, and I'm enjoying it. The podcast is always best with a guest, but I don't want to just be the podcast that only has guests on and ends up with one episode a month. And that is just not fun. I also want to try to, as I've stated earlier in this podcast, to try to get better at communication and describing complex topics in easier form, and this podcast is perfect practice for that. Today's topic is the 8-step framework to solve any problem. This framework is 8 steps that you may have used, you may have not used. It is a general framework. It is not a specific framework. You obviously can't have a specific framework that works on every single problem, because that's going to be problem specific. But every single problem in a mechanical room you can solve with a framework and a guide. And if you are not troubleshooting with a guide and you walk in and you don't have a process for your service call, or if you're an operator and you don't have a process to figure out issues with your plant, and you just go in guessing, you should follow this framework. So this framework, 8 steps, 1 through 8, obviously. Each step, I will go through an example of what the step is, an example of it, and how to apply it. Step 1, observe the system. Look, listen, feel, and smell. Identify what is happening and what is not happening. Observe the symptoms. Compare your observations to the normal sequence of operation of the equipment. Do not jump to conclusions or assume you know what the problem is based on experience. So that is very, very important. Every single step is important, but this is where you need to get on the right path. If you start on the wrong path, your entire troubleshooting process will be derailed. And if you don't take time to observe the system, observe the symptoms, observe what's going on, and to take in information, take in data, process, and eventually process that data, you are not going to know what you're doing, and you're going to end up being lost. And you could end up working on a problem that's actually not a problem, or not the main problem, or not the problem. So observe the system. If you are a technician or anybody just walking into a mechanical room for the first time, set down the tools and walk around. 1, make sure that you're working in a safe environment, that there's not anything jumping out at you that is going to be an issue. Make sure your exits are clear, e-stops, all that stuff. But we've already determined it's a safe environment. We're going to be looking at the boiler, at the system, and observing it with our eyes. So we're looking around. We are listening. Does anything sound off? There is a typical mechanical room hum. You can hear, when there's metal screeching, or you can hear when combustion is off in a burner, most likely. You can feel things. Obviously, don't feel things that are going to burn you. There's a lot of hot things in a boiler room, but you can, touch the side of a feed water tank. If there's no temperature gauge, if it's not insulated, is the feed water tank cold? Is the feed water tank hot? Is makeup line cold? Is it warm? Is it room temperature? There's all kinds of stuff that you can do with that. And then smell. Smell is a big one. You're obviously not going to want to smell chemicals or anything like that, but if you're having electrical problems and you smell electrical burnout, I don't know how to describe the smell, but it's a very distinct smell of when something has burned, like a transformer. And you open a panel and you smell that smell, that's a good indicator that you have a burned up component. And that is something that you should keep in mind and look for to find that burned up component. Now, don't assume that that is the problem and you have a burned up component. They could have had one last week, and that smell does linger inside of panels because the panel probably wasn't cleaned, and it will have carbon and that smell that lingers. So don't always assume that just because what you are seeing or smelling is always relevant to your problem. You just need to be discerning and make sure that you are taking everything in and not jumping to conclusions. One of the biggest problems experienced people struggle with is hearing a problem over the phone or reading on a dispatch software or a work order software of the problem, and they go, oh yeah, I know how to solve that. This is the problem. And then they walk in and they just jump right in and say, hey, this is how we solve this. And this component has to be changed because I've done this before. That can work, and that is valuable to know. But also at the same time, if you just slow down and you take your time and run through the proper steps, you can avoid changing parts and components and doing things and wasting time on repairs that are not necessary or do not fix the problem. And I always believe that slowing down and taking a little bit extra time is always faster in the long run than take the turtle approach and not the hare approach, and slowly work through the problem instead of just jumping from what you think it is. Oh, it must be this. Change this part. Oh, that doesn't work. Oh, it must be this. Change this part. Oh, that doesn't work. That is not troubleshooting. That is guessing because you did not start in the groove and observe the system. This step is also part of the observation is taking in what other people think. So if you are a service technician, this would be what your customer contact thinks the problem is, what they're describing the problem, or, hey, we turn on the burner switch to the boiler and nothing happens, or, hey, the boilers don't make enough steam, or the feed water tank is leaking, whatever. And we need to be very mindful in this step that we are writing and noting observations or mentally noting observations. But these are all observations and these are not facts. So there are some simple facts of, hey, the feed water tank is leaking, and it could appear like it's leaking, but what if it's a valve above the tank that is leaking and dripping under the insulation, and the water is coming off the bottom of the insulation? So now you just ripped all the insulation off the feed water tank. You're like, oh, the tank's not leaking. It's the valve above it. Oh, well, yeah. Now you just ripped all the insulation off the feed water tank. So once again, we are taking in and observing. These are not facts, and customers will lie to you unintentionally or intentionally, most of the time unintentionally. If they were experts, if they 100% knew what was going on, they probably wouldn't be calling you. They would just fix it themselves. So what they say can be valuable, but don't take it as fact. That can also be very misleading if somebody says, hey, this is the problem, and I think this is how we should solve it. Like, this is bad. Can you just change this part? that will work in some instances, but in some other instances, you change the part and it doesn't work. And they're like, oh, like, why didn't you check if that was actually bad? And they'll blame you for not troubleshooting or confirming that the part they told you to change was actually bad. So observe the system, slow down, get in the groove, and actually understand what is going on. Step 2, define the problem. Write in one simple sentence what you think the problem is. Most problems are simple in nature. Keep it clear and straightforward. Use your observations to describe the problem without adding extra what ifs. The important part of this step is write in one simple sentence. And you can make it longer than one sentence, but I would want to condense it as much as possible, and it should not be more than 3 sentences. You should be able to clearly define the problem and write it down. If you call somebody else for help and they say, all right, what's the problem? If you stumble over your words, if you hem and haw, if you can't tell them exactly what the problem is, you don't actually know what the problem is. And you need to go back to observing and actually truly understanding what you are working towards. Because if you don't know what the problem is, you don't know what you're actually solving. And you need to be mindful that you are not looking at symptoms and versus a problem. So a symptom would be the feed water tank is cold. That could be a problem, or that could be a symptom, but it's hard to know at this point. But if a customer says, hey, our feed water tank is cold and doesn't warm up, that could be a problem, or that could be a symptom. But you don't really know at this point. But don't assume that what you determine what the problem is 100% the problem. Once again, this is a very loose framework in that each step, we're not talking about facts here. We're just taking in observations and we're working through it. This framework you can recycle repeatedly over and over and over again and refine the problem and refine steps as you go through it, so that as you gather more information. But what you know is you're going to define the problem. So if the customer says, hey, the problem is the feed water tank is cold, and you go out there and say, yep, yeah, feed water tank is cold and it should be hot. Yep, it has steam heat. It's not working. Feed water tank is cold. And that would be a problem. But if for some reason the boilers weren't even making steam, then, well, yeah, the feed water tank is going to be cold because you don't even have steam to heat the tank. So the actual problem is in the boilers. So that's kind of where you can see a symptom versus a problem. Yeah, they see the feed water tank is cold, but that's not actually, there's not actually a problem in the feed water tank. It is actually going to be upstream over at the boilers, because the boilers aren't even making steam for whatever reason. But, that's a very clear example. Most people are going to understand when the boilers are making steam versus when they're not making steam, but not always. So never assume, but there's often a blurred line between the problem and the symptom. But once again, we are not talking about facts here. We are talking about our best observation of what the problem is, and we can always refine it and cross it off. And you may have multiple problems. This is not we have one problem and we only work on it and there's no other problems, but we want to narrow down our troubleshooting process and actually get to focus on what the problem is. Because if you go into a mechanical room that has a lot of problems, it can get overwhelming and you can get lost in your head and get overwhelmed of, I have all these problems, you don't know how to solve them. I need this part, I need that part, this is happening, that is happening, and stuff may be happening, only become and appear like they're problems, but they're just symptoms of a larger problem. Step 3, list possible causes. Write down every component or section of the mechanical room that could cause the symptoms that you are observing. Consider both upstream and downstream parts of the system. This is also very, very important. Don't skip this step. So we have defined the problem, or what we think the problem is, in step 2, and then we're going to write down the causes. So if we have a boiler that is intermittently tripping on low water, it could be a boiler issue. It could be a feed water pump issue. It could be a check valve issue. It could be a low water cutoff issue. It could be a water chemistry issue. It could be a load demand issue. It could be a feed water tank issue. It could be a softener issue. It could be a fill issue with the feed water tank. It could be level. It could be electrical. There's all kinds of causes, and this is going to take a little bit of understanding the sequence operation and what is actually supposed to happen. And if you don't understand the sequence operation and how the equipment is actually supposed to work, you are going to struggle to troubleshoot, as how do you troubleshoot something if you don't know what normal is? And one of the things I always go back to, and this is a little side note, is if you ask yourself what is moving that should not be moving and what isn't moving that should be moving, that can help you solve a lot of problems without fully understanding the full system. You don't have to understand 100% of what everything is doing inside a system, how all the components work. You just kind of have to understand what is causing the issue and figure out how to solve that problem. Like if a valve isn't working in a large plant and you're like, well, I don't know how this affects the whole system, but I know that this valve should be opening because the operator says if they press this button, this valve is supposed to open and it doesn't. Well, let me figure out why it's not opening. And if you go through all the troubleshooting and find, oh yeah, the electrical issue, let me just fix the electrical. And now they push the button and say, yep, yeah, that's good. All right. Yeah, our process seems to be working now. The valve's opening. Yeah. All right. Yeah, we're good. You don't have to understand the entire process, but the operator pretty much labeled it and narrowed it down for you. Say, hey, we're pushing this button and this valve isn't opening. I would never start at hey, I have to understand this entire process and understand the entire sequence of operations and all this stuff. You just have to understand a slice of it, which can expand and contract depending on how complicated the process is. But if troubleshooting was easy, everybody would do it and there wouldn't be a lack of technicians and technical people. So if you feel overwhelmed, you should. But also at the same time, if you break everything down, like this framework and what I'm telling you right now, if you break it down, then you should be able to solve complicated problems because we are clearly defining the problem and writing it down. And then we're writing down possible causes, and we're going to move through each of those causes one at a time. So you're going to write down all the possible causes that you know of that could cause the problem that you clearly defined. And once again, this is not a 100% factual statements. We are just educated guessing at this point for the system. Step 4, test one variable at a time. So you are going to check each item on your list that you wrote down in step 3 and rule out what is working correctly and narrow down the problem area. And you are not going to start swapping parts at this time. Once again, we are not parts changers. We are troubleshooters. We don't change parts on guesses. We don't change parts because you think something is bad. We change parts because we know something is bad and we know something is faulty. We are testing one variable at a time. So if a boiler with a on-off feed water system is going down on low water intermittently, we would look at the check valve. Hey, is the check valve holding properly? Yes, the check valve is working properly. Okay, is the boiler low water cutoff? Is the float, say it's a float system, is the float moving freely? Yes, the float moves freely. Okay, let's take a sample of the boiler water. Is the boiler water, does it have high conductivity? Could it be carrying over? Could we have, high demand that's also interfering with and picking up the water out of the boiler? So you take a water sample, and our water sample is within specs. It's clear. It doesn't have tons of solids. It has a conductivity that is within spec of the manufacturer, and everything else is great. So we're good there. Our feed water piping is in good condition. You go back to the pump. You test your pump. All right, our pump is making good head pressure. I deadhead the pump for 2 seconds. It's making 180 psi. Our boiler's only running at 120 psi, so you should have enough pressure there. I check the suction strainer of the pump. The suction strainer is clean. Then you go to the feed water tank. All right, the feed water tank, the water level is steady. You check the water level, you check the fill, and you go through the whole system. And in this case, let's say that the feed water tank level is actually not steady, and the tank, it'll call for fill, but then the boiler demand is higher than what the feed water tank can supply. So the feed water tank level will slowly drop, and then when the tank runs out, the low water cutoff on the tank will trip, the pump turns off, and the boiler will just steam out the rest of the water that it has before it goes down on low water cutoff. And it'll be calling for the pump, but the pump will be shut off because the feed water tank level is low, and the pump is turned off at the feed water tank. So the feed water tank is the problem, not the boiler in this instance. And so then you would look at, all right, why is my feed water tank not filling fast enough? And say we have a flow operated feed water tank for the inlet. So it's just a float with like a gravity valve. And you find that the pressure reducing valve of the inlet for your fresh water, your soft water into your feed water tank, you find that the valve is not passing enough volume. So the tank is calling for water, but the valve doesn't pass enough volume through it. And that would be testing one variable at a time. So you'd be going through your list, and you can also expand the list from step 3 as you think of them, but you're taking the time during step 3 to write everything down, to actually think about your list, and then you're attacking the list in step 4. If you don't take time to think about the problem and you just narrow in and say, this is the problem, you can get lost and you can miss some very easy issues. And this is very, very hard to do when you're making your list in step 3 of your previous biases. Oh, well, whenever I see low water cutoff issues in the boiler, it's normally this, so that's what must be the problem. And then you just jump into that, and, well, it must be the low water cutoff, so I'm going to change the low water cutoff of the boiler. Then you end up changing the part, and it doesn't actually solve the issue. So once again, we are slow and methodical troubleshooters. We are not jumping to conclusions, but we are on step 4, so we're testing one variable at a time. So we have found that the pressure reducing valve, and if you don't know, let me explain it in this situation. So you typically will have between 80 psi and 100 psi of inlet water pressure coming out of your water softener. And when you have a gravity valve on a float for your feed water tank, the float only has so much shutoff pressure. So you have to reduce the pressure before the float to 30 to 40 psi so that the water pressure doesn't leak through the float when the float has turned off the valve and the feed water tank is satisfied. So that's why we're going to have a pressure reducing valve in that instance. On a little higher tech feed water system, you would have maybe a solenoid valve that's going to open and close based on some like level probes. That could also work. You also want to make sure that solenoid valve has a shutoff pressure rating that is the inlet higher than the inlet water pressure. So if that shutoff rating isn't rated for the water inlet pressure, you're going to need to reduce it as well. So we have a pressure reducing valve, and we've determined that we have 80 psi on the inlet of the valve, and when the float opens, we only have 20 psi or so on the outlet, and we have very low volume. And then when the tank eventually fills, that pressure will slowly climb to 40 psi is what we're reduced to. But also, if you don't know, pressure does not equal volume. So we can have tons of pressure, but if we are passing water through a needle-sized opening, we're not going to have volume. But when you don't have volume, the pressure is going to drop off, in this case with the water flow. Step 5, analyze your results. You're going to compare your results versus normal values. And I've kind of already gone over this. And you have normal values of, all right, I know my feed water tank, the level is supposed to vary. It's going to turn the water level is going to drop. We're going to have our fill valve. It's going to open. It's going to fill the tank, and then it's going to shut off. And I've identified this component, this pressure reducing valve. It seems to be the problem. It is reducing the pressure from 80 psi to 40 psi water pressure. And for some reason, we're not getting enough volume through this valve. And we're going to double check it. So then you say, all right, let me see, how am I going to double check this? So you make sure you have a pressure gauge on the downstream of the valve. You make sure you have a pressure gauge on the upstream of the valve. You make sure the pressure gauges work. It's also a big thing. And you verify that you have good inlet pressure, that you actually have 80 psi. You don't assume that the inlet pressure to the pressure reducing valve is good. And that when the valve is closed, you have 40 psi. So you understand that between those two gauges, this component seems to be limiting the volume, but the pressure seems to be working. But when the valve for the fill valve on the float for the tank, when it opens, your 40 psi gauge drops to 10 or 20, and you still have 80 psi on the inlet. And that would indicate that we typically have a volume issue for water. So if you don't know, a pressure reducing valve for water typically has a strainer on the bottom of it, and that is going to be the most likely problem that we are going to look at for this issue. If we are not getting enough volume, but we can get pressure through the pressure reducing valve, what would cause a volume issue? And that would be material in the pressure reducing valve, material in the pipe. Maybe somebody put a carbon steel pipe nipple after the pressure reducing valve, and that nipple is corroded. Maybe they used the wrong pipe. But we're not going to just say, oh, well, I don't have enough water to our feed water tank. This pressure reducing valve needs to be changed. We are double checking everything. So step 6, we're double checking the results. And so I've double checked that I do have water pressure that is correct and sufficient going into the pressure reducing valve. I have checked that I do not have enough water pressure sustained on the outlet, but really we're going to be know that that's a volume issue, not a pressure issue. But the pressure is what we can see. We probably don't have a water meter on a basic feed water tank like this. So then we are going to actually fix the problem, and we are going to pull apart the nut on the bottom of the pressure reducing valve, unscrew it, take out the strainer. Oh, look, it's full of debris. And clean all the debris off, make sure and observe and look up inside that there's no other debris. Maybe turn on the water, flush some water out of the pressure reducing valve with the strainer out of it. Put the strainer back in, screw the nut back on, and you have essentially determined that you fixed the problem at that point. And we are going to assume that there is no piping issues that we can see as far as like a carbon steel pipe used on a water line instead of like copper or galvanized. Galvanized, side note, should be illegal to use on soft water. I've never seen galvanized piping work great, although it is cheap, but you should use something else. But anyways, so we're fixing the problem of what we determined it is, and then we're going to verify the solution. And this is super important. Step 8. So step 7 is fix the problem, which is we just cleaned out the strainer of the pressure reducing valve. Step 8, verify the solution. So we have 80 PSI coming into the pressure reducing valve. We have it reduced to 40 PSI going into the feed water tank for the float valve for the feed water tank. And we're going to drain the feed water tank a little bit so that the feed water tank calls for water. And we'll close the drain. The float valve calls for water, and we look at our gauge, and we have a steady 40 some PSI on the gauge. And we now see a drastic difference between the 10 to 15 PSI that we had before. And we watch the level in the feed water tank. It increases in the sight glass very dramatically before, where it was very, very slow, and the level comes up. And then at the normal water level, the level stops. So then we turn on the boiler, and the boiler runs, and the boiler starts steaming, and the feed water pump comes on and off, and we watch the water level in the feed water tank, and the float valve for the makeup water for the feed water tank is turning on and off, and it's keeping the water level between the two Sharpie marks that you're probably always going to find on the sight glass of the feed water tank of when the valve will start opening versus when the valve should shut. And you are monitoring your water pressure. So you still have 80 PSI, then you have 40 PSI, and you have no leaks or drips on your pressure reducing valve. And at this point, I would say for this example solution or example problem that we have actually fixed the problem, and we verified with physical evidence that we have actually done something and gotten something, and we have gotten a different result than what we had. If I took out the strainer and I cleaned the strainer and the strainer was plugged, and I said, oh, that's the problem, clean and put it back in, turn everything back on, and yep, all right, yeah, we're good to go. Well, if I went back and said, oh, I still have, when the feed water valve opens to fill the tank, I still have 10 to 15 PSI, it seems like we still have a volume issue. So that strainer was a problem, but I didn't verify what I actually did is the issue. So let's go through that. So if I clean the strainer and I say, oh, the strainer was plugged solid, great, that must have been the problem. So I put it back in the pressure reducing valve, turn everything back on, and I still find nothing's changed. Then I would say, all right, I know my pressure reducing valve, it seems to be working properly. It is reducing the pressure, but we still have a volume between the valve and between the pressure reducing valve and the fill valve on the feed water tank. So let me remove this small section of piping and inspect the piping. Normally there'll be a union or something. And, you take it apart and you inspect the piping and you find that the piping is super plugged up with rust and debris, and you find that the piping was carbon steel, or that there's a carbon steel nipple right before the fill valve that was reducing the amount of volume going into the tank. So then you change the piping out to the correct piping to get full flow through, and that would be verifying the solution. So we verified that the solution of the strainer on the pressure reducing valve is not actually the problem. It could be, it's part of the problem, but it's not like the full problem. So then we're going to go back up and circle back up to the step 4, which is test one variable at a time. So then we're going to go back through and step 4, then we're going to test our pipe and say, hey, our pipe is not flowing full volume through it, and take it apart and go then to step 5, analyze the results and say, all right, yep, it's not flowing. We're going to double check it. In this case, double check it that you're just taking the piping apart, and you're going to visually see that the pipe is restricted on the inside. Step 7, you're going to fix the problem. So we're going to put in a new section of piping where the issue was. Ideally, it's going to be the correct piping. Don't just put in the same exact. If it is like carbon steel or something, you want piping that is resistant corrosion. And then we're going to verify the solution again. So we now are looking back. We have 80 psi coming into the pressure reducing valve. We have 40 psi coming out. Our feed water valve for the float seems to be working properly. Our tank level moves up and down, and the boiler is calling for water. The boiler water level moves up and down slowly. We have watched the operation of the boiler working automatic and the feed water tank working automatic. The levels of the boiler and the feed water tank are normal. The pump on the feed water tank is turning on, and then 20 seconds, 30 seconds later, it turns off, which is very normal to fill the boiler. That's all going to depend on the boiler size and the feed water pump pressure and sizing and all that stuff. But the pump is cycling, and the boiler seems to be steaming at a steady rate, and everything is going to appear normal there. And that, in this instance, is going to say, all right, yeah, I am confident that I fixed the problem, and that the pressure reducing valve is not actually bad. It just had a bad strainer that was plugged up. And we also had piping that was plugged up, and the inside diameter of the piping was smaller than what it should have been. So then we had a volume issue, and we've corrected that. So we went through the problems, this framework, twice. So we went through and found the strainer was one problem, but then when we verified the solution, step 8, we found that was not the only problem. So then we went back to step 4 and went back through. Now, if you got to the end and verified the solution and you found no difference, and you are lost and you're like, no, nothing I do seems to work, you probably need to go back to step 1 and reobserve the system and work on your initial observations and actually finding out on step 2 and defining the problem again. You may have defined the wrong problem. You may have looked into a problem that wasn't actually a problem, or looked into a symptom that the problem is actually upstream of it. If you go out in a plant and say, hey, our steam traps aren't working, and you go, yeah, your steam traps are cold. Of course. Let me change them out. Well, if you don't even have steam, that doesn't mean your steam traps aren't working just because they're cold. You would have to have steam for the steam traps to work. So there is a symptom and upstream, downstream that you need to be very mindful of. But it's kind of hard to make up scenarios that cover this framework and going through it all. Some scenarios are very simple, like the one I described. Some other ones you can have. In my past life, I've had service calls where you find 10 different issues that all contribute towards the main issue, but you're just constantly running through this framework. So let me go back through the framework again, just at a high level. Step 1, you're going to observe the system. Step 2, you're going to define the problem. Step 3, you're going to list possible causes. Step 4, you're going to test one variable at a time. Step 5, you're going to analyze the results. Step 6, you're going to double check the results. Step 7, you're actually going to fix the problem. And then step 8 is you're going to verify the solution. And there's a phrase I made up: old dragons love to attack dungeons, find victory. That kind of helps me to remember the steps, but the steps are intuitive, and I'll make a blog post of all the steps on the Boiler and website so that you can download a paper of all the steps, but you should follow this framework. It is a proven framework to solve any problem, and if you make guesses or assumptions and change parts based on what you think versus what you know, you are now a parts changer and a guesser and not a troubleshooter, and you will get inaccurate results and you will get inconsistent results. You need to follow a system. Every single service call, every single problem in the mechanical room is the same as far as the framework and how you can attack it. Just the variables are different. You may be working on a boiler that is 100 horsepower steam boiler one day, or you may be working on a 2 million BTU hydronic boiler the next day. It doesn't matter what you're actually working on, but you're going to follow the framework, and this framework will make you very, very successful in having first-time fixes if you are disciplined enough to follow the framework. Now, you have to be knowledgeable about the equipment you are working on. If you walk into a mechanical room and you have no idea on the sequence operations and you have no idea where to start, and you are not confident using an electrical meter, you're not confident on how to troubleshoot issues or what actually normal even is, you're going to struggle because you're essentially just guessing all the way. You have to know at some point what a normal boiler room looks like and what your water is doing in a steam system and how a hydronic system works and how to calculate flow and temperature differential and all this other stuff that is very important to have a general understanding of. But I will also say that you don't have to 100% know what is going on. I have fixed a ton of systems when I was a service technician, when I barely knew what was going on, but I knew enough that I was able to find the problem and solve the problem and then verify with operators that the actual system that is bigger than what I understood was working correctly, and that the small problem that I found was fixed. So I hope this framework is valuable to you. Take it. It may seem dumb. It may seem dumb to write stuff down, but if you are disciplined and you take this framework seriously, you will become an expert troubleshooter in the boiler room, and you will have many, many first-time fixes versus callbacks or change parts that were not actually bad. So thank you for listening to this episode of Boiler Wild. If you like this episode or any other episode, please rate this podcast 5 stars in your podcast app. And if you have any other feedback, you can DM me on LinkedIn or email me, eric.johnson@boiler.com. I thank you for listening and stay wild.